The storm rolled heavy over the plains that evening, wind howling against the windows of the cowboy's grand ranch house. He sat alone at the long wooden table, staring at the silver locket in his hand, its chain broken and tarnished with years of wear. It had been left at his gate that morning, hanging on the latch like some forgotten offering. When he opened it, a faded portrait stared back, his late wife's face, smiling, her eyes as warm as the sun. His breath had caught in his chest. For years, he had carried grief like a branding iron pressed into his soul, but now this locket had returned to him as though carried by fate. And with it, a girl, a small orphan with dirt-smudged cheeks, who had stood on his porch whispering that she had nowhere else to go. She was quiet, no older than 10, her dress worn thin, her shoes nearly falling apart. Yet there was something in her gaze, steady and unflinching, that unsettled him. When she saw the locket in his hands, her small voice broke the silence. "Are you going to put that on me?" she asked, her words trembling between hope and fear. He froze. His hands shook so violently the locket slipped, clattering on the table. For a long moment he could not breathe, for it felt as though a ghost had spoken to him through her lips. The cowboy pushed back from the table, stumbling to his knees, his face buried in his hands. Tears came hot and raw, the kind he hadn't allowed himself in years. The girl flinched, confused by his sudden collapse, but she didn't move away. Instead, she reached for the locket, her small fingers cradling it gently, as though she already knew its weight. "Mama used to tell me about you," she whispered, her voice breaking like a secret too heavy for a child to carry. His head jerked up, eyes wide with shock. His late wife had been gone for nearly 5 years. No one should have known the words, the stories, the tenderness she had once spoken in their home. "Who are you?" His voice cracked, torn between fury and desperate need. The girl's lips quivered, but she didn't look away. "An orphan," she said simply, though her tone carried a strange gravity for one so young. "They said I was no one. But she told me I had a name once. She told me you would know it." His chest heaved as though struck by lightning. Every fiber of him screamed to deny it, to shove the memory away. Yet the girl's face, the curve of her brow, the stubborn tilt of her chin, felt hauntingly familiar. He staggered back against the chair, gripping it like a drowning man clutches driftwood. All the wealth he had, land stretching as far as the eye could see, cattle by the thousands, gold hidden in the bank, none of it meant anything against the possibility standing in front of him. Could grief have tricked him into seeing his wife's spirit in this girl? Or had fate truly placed her in his path, carrying both his sorrow and his salvation in her small, trembling hands? The girl watched him silently, her bare feet shifting against the wood floor. At last, she lifted the broken chain. "If you put it on me, maybe you'll remember," she said, her voice almost pleading. His knees buckled again, and he sank to the floor fully, staring up at her through blurred vision. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his voice had left him. Only tears spoke, running down his cheeks unchecked. In the silence that followed, thunder cracked outside, shaking the walls. The fire in the hearth flickered low, casting their shadows long and uncertain across the room. The cowboy felt as though the house itself had drawn breath and held it, waiting. The girl still held out the locket, her hand steady despite the storm. It gleamed faintly in the firelight, a symbol of love lost and perhaps love found again. He thought of the nights he had prayed for a sign, for some mercy in his loneliness. He thought of the way he had buried his heart, believing no answer would come. And now here was a child, a stranger, a whisper of his wife's memory, asking him to place a chain around her neck like a blessing or a curse. He reached out with trembling hands, then stopped, afraid to touch it, afraid to touch her. Finally, his voice broke through the silence, ragged and desperate. "If I do this," he whispered, "I need to know the truth. I need to know who you are." His words cracked like dry earth in drought. The girl's eyes shimmered with something deeper than tears, something that looked like recognition. She stepped closer, the locket glinting between them, and in a voice soft as prayer, she said, "You already do." And with those words, the cowboy felt his world collapse and rebuild all at once. He knelt in tears before a child who might be nothing more than a lost soul, or the answer to every broken prayer he had ever uttered. The storm raged on outside, but within the walls of that lonely house, destiny had already arrived. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. The cowboy hadn't slept. He sat in his chair near the hearth, eyes hollow, the silver locket turning endlessly in his fingers. The girl had curled up on a blanket by the fire, small and fragile, yet she slept with a calmness that unsettled him. How could she speak with such certainty, when she was just a child? His heart ached with hope, but his mind screamed for proof. He had been tricked before by men who envied his land and women who wanted his wealth. If this girl carried truth, he needed to uncover it, but if she carried lies, it would break him deeper than death ever had. When she woke, she found him still staring. Her eyes blinked open, dark and searching, too old for her years. She sat up slowly, her hands folded in her lap as though she knew a trial was coming. "You think I'm lying," she said softly, almost as if she could read his thoughts. He flinched, his jaw tightening. "I don't know what I think," he answered, voice raw. "But a girl doesn't show up on my porch with my wife's locket unless there's more to the story." She lowered her gaze, and for the first time, he saw fear flicker in her. "I didn't steal it," she whispered. "It was given to me." His chest tightened. "By who?" The pause that followed was so long it felt like the house itself was listening. Finally, she lifted her chin. "By her." His hand slammed against the table before he could stop himself, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Don't you dare speak her name unless you can prove it," he roared. The girl didn't cry, she didn't run, she simply stared back, her lips trembling but steady, as though she had expected his fury all along. His anger drained into silence, leaving only exhaustion. He slumped into the chair, burying his face in his hands. He had built an empire of cattle, weathered droughts, fought rustlers, and buried a wife, but nothing had ever undone him like the sound of this child's voice. When he looked up, she was still watching him, calm, unblinking. "She told me you'd be angry," the girl said quietly. "She said you don't believe anything unless you can see it with your own eyes." His breath caught. Those exact words had once been spoken to him by his wife, during a long-ago quarrel. How could the girl know them? He staggered to his feet, pacing the floor. "Tell me something only she would know," he demanded. "Something no one else could ever tell you." The girl hesitated, biting her lip. Then she whispered, "She said the night you married her, you dropped the ring in the dirt because your hands were shaking. And you thought no one saw. But she did, and she laughed about it every day after." His knees weakened. He had told no one that secret, not even the preacher who had married them. The memory struck him like a blow, tearing him open. He gripped the edge of the table, gasping as if the air itself had betrayed him. The girl approached, slow and deliberate. She placed the locket on the table between them, her hand small against the tarnished silver. "She told me to find you," she said. "She said I belong to you, even if you didn't know it yet." His throat burned. The words were a knife twisting in old wounds. He wanted to ask how, why, where this strange thread of fate had come from, but his voice failed. He only stared, caught between terror and longing. That evening, unable to bear the silence, he saddled his horse and rode into town, the girl left behind under the watch of his housekeeper. He went to the church, to the preacher who had known his wife best. He demanded to know if there had been any whisper, any rumor of a child, of kin, of something hidden from him. The preacher only shook his head, sorrow in his eyes. "Your wife was faithful, son," he said gently. "If this girl carries her spirit, then it is not of flesh, but of something greater." The cowboy rode home with the preacher's words gnawing at him, more lost than before. When he returned, the girl was waiting by the fire, the locket still clutched in her hand. She looked at him as though she had been watching the door every moment he was gone. "You went to ask about me," she said. He froze, unsettled again by her knowing tone. He nodded stiffly, unable to lie. "And what did they tell you?" she asked. His lips parted, but no sound came. He could not bring himself to say it, that perhaps she was not flesh of his wife, but something else entirely. Something sent. The firelight flickered across her face, and for the first time he saw it, the faintest echo of his wife's smile, hidden beneath her childlike features. It broke him. He dropped to his knees before her, tears spilling once more, his voice shaking. "If you're hers," he whispered, "if you're truly hers, then I will never let you go." The girl placed the chain gently in his hand and whispered back, "Then put it on me." And for the first time since his wife's death, hope surged in his chest, not the hope of wealth, not of power, but of love reborn in the most impossible of forms.